everyone, and welcome to another video. Today I'm going to talk about what I did in January for the Invisible Cities project. If you want to know about the Invisible Cities project in general, I suggest you look at the videos that I will link below made by the hosts. So in January, the countries that we focused on were Argentina, Japan, and Morocco, and that is also the order in which I'm going to treat them today. This is kind of going to be a chatty video in which you will see some images of the food and the movies, but I will just talk in the backgrounds about the book as well as the food and the movies. So if you're thinking, why is she talking about the book and showing me a picture of food? That is why. Anyway, let's start with Argentina. So for Argentina, I read the book Dead Girls written by Selva Almada, which was translated by, let me check, Annie McDermott. I made some empanadas and I watched the movie El Ángel. So let me start talking about the book at least. It's a kind of a non-fiction book, but it does also touch on other genres. Sometimes you wonder where the line between fictions and non-fiction is. And it is about the topic of violence, free violence towards women in Argentina. And in the book, Selva Almada focuses more on the death of 3 young women. This is all set in the 1980s, by the way. And she tells us how these 3 women came to die and the effects that had also on their families afterwards and on the country as a whole. And besides these 3 women, she also talks about other violent acts. So we will have random rapes, random killings, random punches, random day-to-day acts of violence thrown in there as well. So the subject of this book was fascinating, and I think it's very important also to talk about this and the way it was done. However, there was a lack of structure, and the lack of structure meant that on the one hand, you could really see how this violence is a day-to-day thing and how it impacts your day-to-day life, as in kind of the fear that there is, and at the same time trying to ignore it as well. But on the other hand, because of the lack of structure, I, for one, and also the other people that read it, we couldn't keep the 3 women that the book was mostly about. We couldn't keep them separate from one another. We couldn't tell them apart. And that's just a bit weird. I think the book, the potential was so much bigger than what it did, and to a certain extent what it did was good, because the pieces of random violence, the pieces of violence that was not towards the 3 women, of the main 3 women of the book, they were brought in such a, not necessarily nonchalant, but out of the blue kind of way that I think it also shows how it would feel when that has happened. It's just you're doing your own thing and then suddenly out of nothing this horrible thing happens to you. So the way in which that was a gut punch, I think that was very well done, but that's really all that I have to say. Now, one thing that I liked was that in the book, a lot of times people were drinking mate, and that is one of the things that when I did an evening with food and a movie, that I also made sure that I had some mate, so that is the drink that you will see at one point in a big I love you cup. It's a kind of, well, I don't want to say something that is wrong, but to me it felt like a sort of tea, but it was very strong. And it's supposed to be a very social event surrounding mate because you all drink from the same cup, the same drinking thing with a straw. Anyway, so I made empanadas, and to be honest, they were very good. I was very happy. I made some vegan, no, that's not true. I added some cheese and some. So vegetarian, at least, empanadas with, on the one hand, sweet potato and lentils, and on the other, sweet potato and kale. That was supposed to be kale and mushroom, but apparently the mushrooms had already been used. But it was very good. It took me a lot longer than I thought to make the dough, and then also to actually make the empanadas, because the folding, the making the squares, the putting stuff in, the folding it, making sure it doesn't come out, that took longer than I had expected, but the result was worth it, and I think this is something I should make more often. And we were eating this while we were also watching the movie El Ángel. not necessarily my first choice of the options that I had for Argentina, but this was the one that my boyfriend was interested in, so we went for that. And it's based on a true story about a young man, and this young man becomes a very violent criminal, and he kills a bunch of people out of nowhere. And this thing that is special about this young man is that he comes from a well-off family. He has loving parents. There was nothing in his life up until that moment. Apparently, a lot of people thought that you had to have bad things happen to you in order to become these psychopathic tendencies. But in this case, that was not what was true. And this young man, so the movie is a little bit about his descent into. He starts by just burglaring, and then it's just free violence, killing random people off the street. And this movie is about how he is caught as well. It was very violent, as you can expect from the theme, but somehow the way it was filmed and the I'm not going to be able to say this word, but the way cinematography, yeah, we're going to go with that. That was very pretty. There were a lot of cool zoom in thingy. It was an entertaining evening for a movie that is not really my type. Now let's go to Japan, which is the next country I went to on this project. I was going to read two books. One is The Housekeeper and the Professor by Yoko Ogawa, and this is translated by Stephen Snyder, and I was also going to read another book, The Makioka Sisters, but they arrived, I had ordered two copies, both as from a bookshop as from the library, and because of lockdown and Brexit, my two copies arrived very late, and I ended up reading this on script. So so that is for the books. I also made some ramen soup, although I don't have any footage of that. I also made some sushi with a bunch of different ingredients, with salmon, eggs, avocado, bell pepper, and one last thing, shiitake. And as for a movie, I ended up just rewatching one of my favorites from the Ghibli studios, which was My Neighbor Totoro. Now let's start with the book. It's a very small book. I hadn't expected it to be this short. And the main character is the housekeeper, and the housekeeper is sent to work for a math professor, and this math professor has a very slight problem, and that is that due to an accident that he has years before that, his memory does not last for longer than 80 minutes. So whenever the 80 minutes are over, he just forgets everything that happened before that. And that means that when she comes to his house every day, she has to explain yet again who she is and establish this feeling of trust. Now, this professor is obsessed with numbers, maths, and numbers, primal numbers in specific, are his things. And he uses those numbers to understand the world, and also then to understand what this woman is doing. And when she comes, he always asks her height and her phone number and stuff like that. And this book is about their relationship, and at one point also her son is brought into it because the professor decides that her son needs to be with her at all times, at least when he's not in school. It's a slow book, there isn't a lot happening, but the way that the relationship is depicted is wonderful. It's very heartwarming and very lighthearted. The writing is sparse, but in a very warm type of way. That's not a great explanation, I realize that. But let me just say that it was wonderful writing, and the relationship that they have and the importance of math in that made the nerd in me very happy. I liked learning all of these things about primal numbers. And the book is not only about math and about the relationship, but also about the importance of memory and the importance of the past and the importance of being in the present. It was a delightful read, and I'd recommend it to anybody that likes things like The Elegance of the Hedgehog. And to me, the movie that I watched, My Neighbor Totoro, is in a similar vein somehow, because there isn't really a lot happening in the movie. It's about two young girls, two sisters, and they move to the countryside because their mother is very ill, and therefore she will have some more fresh air when she is there. And the two girls, the house in which they arrive, they think that it is haunted, and they come across some magical creatures, including the Totoro. And what I love about Studio Ghibli films is that it doesn't follow the standard Hollywoodish pattern. It's not necessarily about two people falling in love, it's not necessarily about having to save someone, it's just going through the motions and being happy. It's very lighthearted. And I love this movie because of the representation of their sisterhood and the link that they find with nature and how important nature is. I thought that was wonderful, and it was a delight to watch it again. I've been listening to the Studio Ghibli soundtrack for years already, but the last time that I actually watched this movie was a long time ago. So it was nice to fit also the music that I've been listening to the images once again. The last country that I went to for this project is Morocco. And I don't currently have the book right now, it's downstairs and I don't feel like getting it, but I read Le Pays des Autres by Leila Slimani, and I read that in French, so it was not translated. But it was good to read a book in French, although I do feel kind of conflicted about that at the same time, because the reason that a lot of Moroccan authors write in French is because France used to have colonized Morocco. So it's not necessarily a good thing. Anyway, in the end, I did not watch a movie for Morocco. I spent a lot of time looking for something that was available for me, and there were no options. So that is sad, but I'm still going to be looking for some documentary maybe at one time. But I did make some couscous with some grilled vegetables, and we also had some grilled chicken, which also was weird. Like the salmon with the sushi was weird because I don't tend to eat a lot of meat and no fish, but sometimes I'll allow myself something. So because this was a special project, I thought, okay, I'll allow myself some chicken. And the chicken was marinated, and it was so good that even now, a couple of days later, I'm still enjoying it. And the couscous as well, I just had it today for lunch, and it was really good. Now, as for the book, so I read Le Pays des Autres by Leila Slimani, and it is about a couple. She comes from France, from the Alsace, and he comes from Morocco, and they meet during the Second World War in France, and they get married, and she moves with him to Morocco, to the city of Meknes, which is where, at that point, also a lot of colonialists live. And this book spans 10 years, and it's about their relationship. So he is working very hard to make sure that the farm that he owns comes to fruition, and she is trying to find her place. And at the beginning, she's very lonely. She doesn't have a lot of friends, and she had imagined a very different life. She had imagined this luxurious and exotic Moroccan life, and that is not at all what she gets. She gets the life of a housewife in a farm, being poor, trying to raise two children who are trying to grow up in a world where they are neither French nor Moroccan, and where their parents fight a lot, but also have a very lustful relationship, so do also stay together. It's a very slow-moving book, and I had expected there would be more of a commentary on this life in a country that is not yours, because that is also what the title means. Le Pays des Autres is the country of others. And it does talk about that, but in a very nuanced kind of way. And I think I would have liked it to be a little bit more about that, and also more about the life and the point of view of the children. We get some parts of the book are also from this point of view of their daughter, but she is 6 to 7 years old, and she does get bullied at school. She goes to a French school, but I would have been interested to see how she grows as a woman with this dual identity. That would have been fascinating, and I would have completely been here for that. Another thing that the book does is that in the second half of the book we meet some random other characters. So we have another soldier that used to serve with the man, and how the Second World War, and he also went to Indonesia, how that impacts his life. And we have a Jewish Hungarian man that has fled a couple of countries and now living in Morocco as a gynecologist. And although it was interesting to have their views and their lives in Morocco, what they didn't really serve a purpose in the overall storyline, well, there wasn't really a huge storyline or huge plot, so maybe that's why it felt a little bit out of place to read about them, because it's the kind of book where you just get sucked into the day-to-day life and a kind of day-to-day rhythm and not a lot happens, and then to have another actor introduced and not have that actor really do anything, but you still get the impression that the actor is there for a reason, that felt a little bit weird. So I'm a little bit disappointed about that book. Not as lot as I thought. I was afraid I was going to, because I had heard that the book wasn't great. So it was not as bad as that. But just like with Dead Girls, I think the potential would have been a lot bigger. But I did love Leila Slimani's writing, and I am going to get to her other book, the one that she got a big French prize for, Le Prix Goncourt, which is Une chanson douce, which has been translated to lullaby. Because of the writing, there were some pieces that I thought were very beautiful. Anyway, that was what I did in January for the Invisible Cities project. It was a lot of fun to discuss also the books that I read with other people on the Discord app. I've been loving the community and seeing also how other people are doing things for this project. I love that some people are focusing on one country and others are just reading 3 books per country and stuff like that. That has been wonderful, and I'm really looking forward to February. I also like with these kind of things that on the one hand you can plan, so I already know what I'm going to read in February, but as for food and movie, I kind of do that more based on mood, and I also get to do that a little bit more with my boyfriend, which also has been great. Anyway, I'll talk to you in the comments, and I'll see you in the next video. Thanks for watching, bye!